Hello and welcome to ASB TDC TV, a product of a partnership between the University of Arkansas Small Business and Technology Development Center and the Northwest Arkansas Council Small Business Emergency Assistance Program. In this series, we're talking with small businesses and experts and ASB TDC consultants about the relevant and right now topics and solutions for business. I'm Amy Robinson.
Hi guys, my name is Chris Case and today we're here with Stephen Morgan. And Morgan, I'm going to ask you first. You guys get a lot of questions and concerns. What are some of the common questions that you get these days?
Well, let me just frame it up real quick. So we know Congress has been very busy passing laws to address the coronavirus response. And one of those things has been the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, which created the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, which requires employers to pay up to 2 weeks of full paid time off for their employees who have coronavirus concerns. So a few of those things, there are 5 main reasons why an employer would have to pay the 2 weeks additional sick time off. So those would be one, that they're subject to federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation orders. The second one being that they've been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine or self-isolate. 3, that they're experiencing symptoms and they're actively seeking a medical diagnosis for those symptoms. 4, that they're caring for individuals that are subject to a quarantine order, or that those individuals are advised by healthcare professionals to self-quarantine. And then number 5 being caring for a child whose school or childcare has been shut down due to COVID. So those are the 5 main reasons that an employer would be required to pay for 2 weeks paid time off. I will note, however, that those first 3 that I mentioned, quarantine order, advised by healthcare providers, or experiencing symptoms, are full paid time off, whereas the fourth, the caring for individuals that are subject to quarantine order and caring for children are 2/3 pay time off for those 2 weeks. So that's kind of a broad overview of the Sick Leave Act and kind of just to frame it up for us.
Steve, there's also a lot of talk about the tax credit that comes along with that. A lot of our clients are small businesses, and so I think that if you can kind of give us an overview of that tax credit and also kind of some scenarios that you all are coming across when it comes to how this applies to those small businesses.
Sure, absolutely. And just to canvas back over something that Morgan said, the obligation to pay the sick leave is not tied to, it is decoupled from the underlying way that the person contracted the potential, sickness or whatever. There are a lot of questions we see about a particular scenario, about, a distant relative or what have you. The fact of the matter is, if it meets one of the 4 or 5 requirements that Morgan laid out, then the employer's got an obligation to pay sick leave. There are some documentary requirements, and we'll cover those in a little bit. If you do, as an employer, pay sick leave, referred to as qualified leave wages, those wages that you pay are recoverable in the form of a tax credit against the employment taxes that you pay as an employer. As a practical matter, what that means is, as an employer, you, or most likely your payroll provider or accountant, file on your behalf quarterly payroll tax returns. And on those quarterly payroll tax returns, you're required to list out the wages, the period wages that you had that cover the period for the return. You're required to then specify that whether those wages are withheld payroll taxes that you are withholding from the employee's wage and remitting to the U.S. government or the Treasury on their behalf. Number 1. And number 2 is FICA taxes that you are withholding from the employee and paying to the government on the employee's behalf. 1/2 of those, and the other half being from the employer. All of those taxes are recoverable through a credit up into the extent that you've paid qualified sick leave wages. And so when you file that return, you are able to note on that return and claim a credit and essentially retain those funds that you would otherwise pay to the Treasury in connection with the filing of your return.
And that's kind of how they're trying to help small businesses do the right thing, keep everybody healthy when 2 weeks quarantine are required, when they are sick themselves, or to some of Morgan's examples of having to take care of someone, or any number of other situation that is how those funds are somewhat recoverable.
That's right. That's
Excellent.
right. And I would also add to that, Amy, there are certainly situations where there may be a timing gap, right, in the filing of the return and the ability to access those withheld taxes. I would note that the IRS also has a way to seek in advance against future taxes. I am not an expert in that. I have not pursued that yet, and I don't have a client who has, but note that there is a way. It is on the IRS website to seek in advance.
Excellent.
So does this, I mean, I know this is all new and we really don't know what tomorrow brings, but are there changes that are being made to this, you know, on a regular basis? And if so, you know, how would like a small business like myself find out more information on all the updates, if you will?
Yeah, so definitely it's a bit of a moving target here, like much of what we're seeing. So the Department of Labor issues their kind of interim regulations through a series of frequently asked questions, which are very useful. They're just on the Department of Labor website, and it kind of goes through, you know, questions, scenarios in which small businesses might really find useful. Definitely I found very useful, and those will eventually become regulation in the actual rule of the law.
And then there's also a lot of question that comes in the form of scenarios that people walk through what to do when, and the liability that they may or may not have in those, in the actions that they take. So again, always evolving and always changing. I know, Steve, that you had mentioned that the Department of Health is a good resource when it comes to some of those what to do when scenarios, especially when they're COVID-related cases.
Yeah, certainly. I would encourage, of course, I can't imagine an open restaurant or small business today that has not visited the Department of Health's website to see what the reopening guidance is, but we are told by Department of Health authority that the hotline, the 800 number that is available to small businesses remains open and remains updated, and that is the most, you know, the best form of current information that they can obtain. I would encourage you know, small businesses to seek information there. And it's also, as you mentioned, Amy, tied very closely to what I would believe as a lawyer, a small business owner might have in terms of questions is, what is my liability, right? I mean, it's got to be a big question. If I'm going to make the decision to open my business, I'm subjecting myself to risk. Small businesses are used to that. They do that anyway by opening their business up to the public. But this is a heightened form of risk. And I would be worried about, well, you know, what happens if an employee, unbeknownst to me, is positive for the virus and unfortunately infects coworkers or patrons. Luckily, the answer to that is, and by the way, very early on in this process, that was sort of the highest and most important level of question that I saw and could answer. And my answer to that would be, as a business owner, I just don't see how you could mitigate that liability. It seems super, super gray. However, Arkansas has issued Executive Order 2033 that has addressed this, and they have essentially said that that small businesses who follow the Department of Health's guidelines are immune from civil liability. This does not apply to willful, reckless, or intentional misconduct, obviously, but it does help small businesses prevent getting sued by either their employees or patrons. And in dealing with the public, that's a pretty important protection to have.
It sure is.
Absolutely is.
Well, and regarding communication, just one more thing I wanted to touch on. Communication is the key in how we message and the timing of communication. What would you guys recommend, or would you, any recommendations to small businesses about how they communicate with not only their employees, but their patrons?
Yeah, so in terms of communication, internally, I'll take the first one. Excuse me. Internally, like any other policy that the employer has, employer-employee laws require that you communicate your policies and your guidelines to your employees, and the employees follow those. So my view is that employers should adopt policies, clearly written policies, and ideally have employees sign that they've read and agree to abide by those policies. This is a difficult one for small businesses because in the rank order of things that have to get done every day, often employee handbooks and policies and manuals fall by the wayside. Right. Some are better at others than doing that. As a small business owner myself, I'll tell you, we still haven't gotten ours finalized. We have one, it exists, but it seems to keep getting pushed back. But it is really important, at least in this case, in my view, to communicate to your employees what you expect of them in terms of their both on-premise and off-premise behavior, and that, should they not follow those policies, there can be consequences such as you could be dismissed from work for a period of time until you can prove that you are safe to return to work. As far as the public, everyone has seen the notices on the doors of almost every small businesses, particularly restaurants. I personally am glad to see that Arkansas restaurants and small businesses that I've been patrons of do a really good job of posting on social, on their apps, on the premises, and that you just communicate to your patrons that you are following those guidelines. So that's all I can say.
Absolutely. Morgan, is there anything in all of these rules, all of these regulations, this constantly moving target for small businesses that you feel like it really needs to be clear and defined, that comes up over and over and over again, or is a point of confusion?
Well, I'll say that first, a lot of these decisions have to be business decisions on whether or not you want to provide leave or paid or unpaid leave to your employees. But as far as the act goes, like an employee can't just unilaterally say I've been exposed, or my boyfriend's mom's been exposed, or there's some gap between exposure. For the purposes of the act, and specifically for the tax credit, you have to be seeking a diagnosis, or be under a state agency mandate or an order, or have seen a doctor, or have the advice of the doctor to self-quarantine or to self-isolate. So definitely all those considerations can be business, but as far as the act goes, that's how it reads and how they are dealing with quarantine issues and seeking a diagnosis.
So what kind of documentation, to Steve's point of running a small business, having 8,000 different things going on, what are some of the things that they can, that they either know that they need to do to have some of those things documented for that tax credit, for the purpose of that tax credit, also for their own, human resources backup? What are some of the things that they either need to prepare or have prepared? What is some of the things that they can do ahead of time, or just what do they need to have documented when this occurs?
Right. So the Department of Labor suggests 4 things that you do if you run into this scenario. You just need to document the name of the employee, the date for which the leave is requested, the reason for the leave, and I will note the reason for the leave could be the healthcare provider, in which they will have to provide the name, or the state agency that has advised them to self-quarantine, and then also a statement from the employee that they are unable to work for those reasons.
Mm-hmm. And can that be done via email? Does it have to be done paper? There's not a form or anything, or can you do it as informally as an email?
As of right now, there is not a specific regulation or frequently asked question to that specific point. always err on the side of caution. I would say both.
Document.
Cover all your bases and make sure
Yeah.
that you are eligible for those tax credits, which will be very important.
Yeah.
Well, and to Steve's point is make sure that they sign it. That just documents that they've, and I think that's the best thing that you could do.
As far as the credit is concerned, what I would say is, anytime you have a third-party paid preparer engaged to file a return, we're all familiar with this as small business owners, that paid preparer signs the return as having been paid to prepare that return. They are under certain obligations and oaths that they're filing a correct return to the best of their knowledge. So some of this information, like the items that Morgan just stated that are required to support the leave, those apply primarily. Those are there's an obligation to provide that information so that when the employer is seeking the credit, the governing authorities know that this is legitimate wages that were paid. And so provide that to your CPA and your accountant, whether they ask for it or not. They should be asking for that so that they know that they're filing a valid return. And so at a minimum, I would say preserve that information, preserve it with your accountant, and hopefully they're better than most of us, including us as a law firm, at keeping these records in case there is ever an audit or an inquiry about it.
Excellent. Well, I can't thank you all enough. And I don't know if you want to share your firm's information or any other websites of information that is very, very helpful. We will definitely, Eldridge Brooks, you guys have been so helpful to us as a team, and want to thank you for being here as well. We want to thank everybody here for joining us. If you have a suggested topic, a question that you need answered, someone that you'd like to hear from, or a story that you'd like to share, please contact us at bizhelp, BUSHELP@uark.edu, and put TV in the subject line. If you are interested in benefiting from our free one-on-one consulting services, please sign up at sbtdc.uark.edu. Thank you all again for being here so much. We appreciate you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
All right. We have stopped recording.
That was painless.
Yeah. I think we nailed it.
I think you did a great job. That was awesome.
Great information.
All of us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great job, Morgan. No, thanks for having us. If there are any follow-ups to any of that stuff, guys, and look, we're a business law firm. That's what we focus and specialize in, small business, because that's what most businesses are. And so we're happy to help. You know how to get a hold of us, send them our way. We're happy to do it.
Yes,
Awesome.
I'm going to ask, I will be
By
asking.
the way, just to be super clear,
Yeah.
we don't, like a lot of lawyers, there's no consulting fee or charge. If they have questions, pick up the phone, call us. We generally would spend a reasonable amount of time on the phone with someone, before we're engaged to do anything. And to us, that's just
Great.
prospecting.
Absolutely.
The ASB/TDC has been gracious enough to pay us some fees to sort of do some research, answer questions, do some things. That's totally fine. I view that as an outreach as part of what you guys have engaged us to do. So just, you can let your folks know that they can call us. There's no fee until we agree there is a fee, right? So.
Okay.
Awesome.
Well, I will. I was going to let Julie know in the description to, when we do have somebody on that is willing to give their contact information, that we'll put that in the description of this video podcast. And then the other thing I'm going to say to you all is thank you so much, because these questions have been lingering and really, really hard for people.
I could feel Mary Beth's frustration and angst in her email to me. It came across at midnight one night, and she was like, "Help, Mario's." I'm like, "Shit, man, I don't know. We need to do some research."
Well, thank you for digging in, because I know it's no small task. So we appreciate you guys very much.
No problem.
All right, we'll see you again
Thanks,
soon.
guys.
All right.
Thanks, all.